Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. This is our quest series that we have been doing, and today we're going to be talking about closed-ended quests and how we develop them. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
All right, everybody, today we're going to be talking about closed-ended quests, but before we dive into that conversation, let's define what is a quest. For the specifics of this video and the series, we're talking about a quest as something where a DM is presenting a task or an objective to the adventurers, to the party, to your group of players in order for them to complete. And when we're looking at closed-ended quests, which we're going to be talking about in this video, we're specifically thinking of a quest line that the DM has already determined what the finale or completion of that quest may be, what's going to bring it to finalization. Whereas last week we talked about open-ended quests, where that may not necessarily be determined. So, John, as we dive into this and talk about closed-ended quests, I know that you and I have both developed these over the years. When you're thinking of a closed-ended quest, what is some specific quest that may fall within that conceptualization?
Well, I think we're going to get into depth on this probably a little bit later as we get into the three pillars of play and that type of thing. But closed-ended quests generally have a very specific task in mind, and I think that that's a little bit easier. Oftentimes, open-ended quests are presented by a hook, and then it kind of unfolds naturally, which leaves room for player input, player action, player decision a little bit more readily, versus something that's a close-ended quest. And something that I think about as being a really good example of that are some of the quests that we run or we have run in your Nordic campaign, where we are supposed to be going to a specific location in order to deliver something or interact with somebody or accomplish a specific goal. So examples would be we were required to deliver slaves from one Jarl to another Jarl as a peace offering. We were supposed to go save a Jarl's son who had gone missing. Those are good examples of close-ended quests because the objective is very clear and it's very obvious as to what it is. The quest of delivering slaves from one Jarl to another can only be accomplished by actually taking the slaves from one Jarl to the other. The task of locating and saving the lost son is only accomplished by figuring out where he's at and then trying to return him to his father. Those can only be done by doing the objective that's clearly stated in the quest itself.
Yeah, and when I create those from a DM perspective, I already have the end in mind. I know what that completion looks like.
Right.
I know that I'm probably a little creative in the way that I do this, or a little bit different than other DMs, because I create quest lines, especially closed quest lines, in the way that I write books. I know how my story is going to end, and then I backtrack from that point in time and kind of develop the plot points along that timeline that are going to lead up to that finalization or to that finale that I've created for the characters. But with that being said, that doesn't mean that there's not nuances in that story for what characters may be able to do or alter the plan that I have. It's just I have a very specific idea of where I want the story to go. It's like a really firm outline that can change if the characters just do something completely erratic. In case of, like, let's say the slaves, completing that quest line meant that you had to take the slaves from one Jarl to the other Jarl. But maybe on the boat ride, you chose to free them and set them loose into the world and not deliver them. You would not have finished that closed quest line that I set it up. But you now have suddenly made this an open quest line because I, as a DM, don't even know what the fuck's going to happen.
Right. Well, and in that specific quest, when we played it, my character decided that one of the people who were enslaved, basically, he wanted to save them, and he realized the Jarl they were delivering them to was just going to execute all of them. And so prior to him executing, I think she was like a 10-year-old girl or something like that, he basically stepped in and said, hey, I want to buy her from you, basically, so that he could free her. Which he didn't tell the Jarl that at the time, I don't think, but he basically was trying to make sure that one of those slaves who he felt like really did not deserve the outcome that was coming, not that really any of them did, but specifically he had the means in order to try and save one of them. And so It's been a while since we played it, but as I recall, I think there was a check involved, some kind of persuasion or something like that. And then he had to exchange some money in order to be able to free this girl from that fate. And even though it was a close-ended quest, the quest was completed by doing, like you said, delivering the slaves. He was able to save her by taking a different action. And that action was allowed because there were certain events that unfolded. He was able to make a persuasive argument and ultimately free this girl from the execution that was awaiting her.
And I know that you're really passionate about this, specifically as a DM when it comes to quest lines, that there are options for the characters, that there's nuances for the characters along quest lines, that they really feel like they're in control of the situation. Many times we play, let's say, RPG video games, and you have very specific quest lines that you're supposed to fulfill. There's only one outcome, and if you don't do the quest, it just forever stays on your quest board or on your quest log, and you're never able to do it. I mean, when I think of closed-ended quests, I oftentimes think of those quest logs because there's no way around it. That just is what it is, and that's the quest that I've been given to complete. But in a closed-ended quest, I think even within a TTRPG, you want to make sure that your characters feel like they have some control in the direction that the game is going, even if you have a really clear idea of how you want the game to end. And I'm thinking specifically right now, we're playing your Cast Down from Haven campaign. We have a very clear quest of what we're trying to do. Killing all these divine beings, gaining levels of divinity, and getting in power of what's going on and what's happening. And it's a very kind of like one and done type of scenario in the way that we're moving through. But we have a lot of ingenuity in how we go about approaching those, what interactions we have, what tools we use, what tactics we use to allow us to move through that quest line and feel like we have some autonomy.
Right. And in general, and again, for anybody who's watching that campaign when we stream it, it is a very different campaign than a lot of what I run. It's kind of a filler campaign as I'm working on our next one that's a little bit more involved. So it is a strange duck to look at from an outside perspective when we talk about a lot of the things that we do in a lot of our games. I will say, I do want to backtrack just a little bit because you were talking about, for instance, CRPGs, things like Baldur's Gate. Some games I really like in terms of what they offer for decision making, for what they offer for the option for you as a player in those games to make decisions. And the reason I bring these up is because we do talk about some of our own personal games, but that's not as universally, well known. People aren't going to be able to be familiar with some of the things that occur in the games that we play internally. But people are familiar with games like Dragon Age with Baldur's Gate, those types of things. Dragon Age is the first one. Dragon Age Origins is an excellent example of a bunch of quests that give you a bunch of options based on how you choose to make decisions. Most of them, in particular, if you're going to Redcliffe and you have to try and go save the son, and I think it's a Earl. Arl is what they use. The Arl of Redcliffe. You're trying to go save a child there, and the outcome of that quest is very unique based on the decisions that you make as the main character in that storyline, whether you choose to try and save the child, allow the child to be inhabited permanently by a demon. Like, there's a bunch of options for that, and it's really satisfying as a player to be able to work through those things. Now, because it's a TTR, or because it's a CRPG, it's pre-coded, they only can present so many options to you, and it's like, I think there's 3 or 4 different ones, which is pretty good. Versus something like Baldur's Gate. Baldur's Gate, oftentimes, they're all closed-ended quests, right? But if you're playing a good character, the outcomes for your quests are almost always better than if you're an evil character. And for anybody who saw the live play that we did, man, it's been 6 months, a year ago now since we started doing that. We did the live one. You probably remember that I was constantly bitching about how a lot of those quests did not present actual options. They would present the illusion of option, but oftentimes there was only one outcome. It's also a criticism of games like Fallout 4, where if you look at the actual coding behind it, the decisions that were made, they would give you 4 options, but there was only one actual option, because no matter what you picked on their little wheel, it always took you to the same exact conclusion.
That's how I
That's
feel about Telltale games as well.
Right.
Like the Game of Thrones and Walking Dead. I mean, there are some changes in the story and what happens, but overall, you always get to the same conclusion.
as a player, I find that exceedingly frustrating. I dislike having a decision wheel where all of the decisions result in the same answer. Like there's only one conclusion that can occur, and I think the most important thing for me to take away when it comes to close-ended quests is to not do that. Allow player decisions to make a difference, even if you know what the end in mind is going to be. Allow them to make decisions. Allow them to try and free all the slaves on the ship. That can happen. Allow them to try and purchase the freedom of the slaves. They can fail. Failure should always be an option because most of these things are going to be tied to dice rolls, to the arguments that the PCs make in order to try and do certain things. Allow for the possibility of failure, but also allow for the possibility of success. That is what makes a fun quest. And I will stop preaching now on that.
I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think that's a great wrap-up to the closed-ended piece. I know that we've talked before about contingencies, and this is something that you've spoken about too, about having specific contingencies, but even having different contingencies like a choice wheel of where a closed-ended quest may go, I think can still fall underneath closed-ended. Even if you know, like if I choose A, choose B, choose C, it's going to lead to the end result of A, B, and C, you still know the different options of where it's going to end, and that's what makes it different. Which for me is a complete separation from open-ended, where even I as the DM have no idea where this quest line is going to go.
Yeah, and it's something that I do oftentimes. I oftentimes will include, if the players do this, this is what happens. If the players do this, this is what happens. And I try to at least make notes of that so that I'm kind of prepared for different eventualities. That's not to say that the players can't choose something that I don't have on my list of options. But as a DM, if I'm thinking those things through in preparation for the players coming in and making an off-the-wall decision, I have a better chance of reacting in a way that makes sense for the scenario because I've thought about the scenario in ways that are not just go from point A to point B. And I think that also is a very important aspect of building close-ended quests, or quest building in general, is that a quest which consists of point A to point B is a boring quest, and it is not worth it's not worth the time, honestly. Quests, and this is something that you were talking about a little bit earlier, there are plot points. There are things that occur for the span of the quest where events can happen, things can change, decisions can be made. All of those things allow for the quest to feel more full-bodied rather than take this letter down the street to a location. And if that is literally all the quest consists of, then it's not worth doing a quest. That's the kind of quest you get in, World of Warcraft.
God damn, I hate those.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys have any questions specifically about closing-ended quests or any videos that you want to see us make on quests, please leave us a comment. Let us know about those so we can work it into our series. And join us next week to see our video on side quests.
Jon and Josh.